Hi everybody, we're going to continue on with the lesson that we started the Thursday before spring break, and that was looking at immigration and diverse peoples or cultures of the West. We already looked at people from Scandinavia, the Scandinavian countries, Asian countries, Germany, Eastern Europe, and Italy. And we're going to look at a couple more and actually just kind of touch on some that we've already talked about. So let's begin looking at immigration, a chart from the 19th century. The people immigrating to the United States between 1841 and 1860, migrating to the U.S. during that time. And you see various countries listed here on this chart in the left-hand column. And of course, these are the years that they came from between 1841 and 1850. You see this column of numbers showing how many people from each country came. And then, of course, 1850 to 1860, how many immigrants from those various countries came at this time. And so on your paper, you'll be answering a question, which two countries did most of the immigrants come from between 1841, which is right here, and 1860. So between these years, 1841 and 1860, which two countries had the most immigrants to the United States? So I'm going to pause the recording right here so you can take time, or you pause the recording so you can take time and write down your answers. All right, so if you answered your questions and came up with Germany and Ireland, you're absolutely right. You can see very clearly right here on the chart that Germany had the highest amount of immigrants between 1841 and 1850. And between 1851 and 1860, nearly a million, almost 500,000 in this decade. And in Ireland, from Ireland, almost 2/3 of a million, 3/4 Irish came to the United States. And then nearly a million in 1851 and 1860. So what were some reasons for that we'll look at in just a little bit? Irish U.S. immigrants by year. So again, if you look at this chart, it says according to the chart, approximately which years saw the highest number of Irish immigrants coming to the U.S. And so the years are down here along the horizontal line. And then up here going up along the side of the graph are the number of immigrants. And I'll give you time to look at that and pause the recording so you can kind of study the chart and come up with an answer. And if you came up with the years approximately 1850 to 1851, right around here, you are correct. Now those years, of course, are not specifically written on here, so you kind of have to read between the little hash marks on the bottom. But between 1850 and 51 saw the highest amount of immigrants from Ireland coming to the U.S. Well, why is that? And that's where you'll begin to add notes to your note page. In 1845 through 1849, there was a potato famine. So a lot of people starving. That was their main source of food, daily, in fact. And I recall reading or hearing a long time ago that the average Irish adult citizen ate approximately, I think it was like 10 pounds of potatoes a day. So, and that's every day. And so that's a lot of potatoes. And when the potato harvest became infected, it had developed some sort of plight in which the potatoes were rotten. They couldn't eat them. They were spoiled and destroyed, and so the entire harvest was destroyed throughout the country, and famine led to starvation throughout Ireland. And so Irish primarily will start to come to the United States for jobs, for life, for food, really, because they're starving to death, and they do lose quite a few people in Ireland during that time. So they moved to the northern urban centers of the United States in the New York City area, Boston, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and so forth. And they faced a tremendous amount of religious discrimination because they were Catholics. There wasn't a lot of love for Catholics in the country at that time. And so they were discriminated against because of that, as well as economic discrimination. People didn't like immigrants, whether it was Irish or other immigrants coming from Europe to the United States, because that meant competition for those factory jobs in the large cities. And so there was a lot of hatred, a lot of discrimination during this time period. Reasons for rapid German immigration. You read about that on the card last week or the week before spring break. Political revolution in the in Germany, and people will leave there because there's a split in their political government. They really want to come to a country that enjoys more freedom of individual rights, and so they find that possible in the United States. So you're going to have a huge influx of Germans. In fact, they'll be the number one, the largest immigrant group serving in the Civil War. Once we talk about the Civil War, my great-great-grandfather being one of those immigrants that will come over during this time period. But yeah, a lot of Germans coming to the United States to escape political conflict in their home country. Chinese immigrants came for a few reasons as well, and you read about that on those cards before spring break. If you look at this picture, I think you can see pretty clearly probably one of the main reasons why they came here, and that was to work on a particular type of transportation. And on your card, or on your note page, I believe I've asked you to look at these pictures and see if you can figure out what it is, the job that they came here to do. And if you said work on the railroad, the transcontinental railroad, you're absolutely correct. So a lot of German immigrants settled in the Midwestern area of Minnesota, of Wisconsin, where I'm from. That's where my family settled. And a lot of immigrants, regardless of what country they came from, tried to settle in areas that reminded them of their homeland. And certainly that was the case with German immigrants. So a lot of them became farmers. That's what they did in Germany. And this is actually a picture of my family, my great-great-grandparents. This appeared in a Wisconsin history book, actually in a number of Wisconsin history books. But my great-great-grandfather is right here. He served in the Civil War as a German immigrant. He didn't speak English. That's his wife, his children, son-in-law. That's his daughter's father-in-law. And so, and this is their farm in Auburndale, Wisconsin, right in the middle of the state of Wisconsin. And they were some of the earliest pioneers of that area of Wisconsin. They also faced discrimination in the United States because they formed their own communities. They formed their own German communities and continued to practice their old world traditions, forming things called beer gardens, where it was a big, it was really, I don't know how else to say it, just a big restaurant that served food and beer, and sauerkraut, bratwurst, and so forth. And they spoke German, and they had German newspapers, and had schools in German, and so they were discriminated against because of that, just like other immigrant groups were for doing the same thing. They were also clustered in skilled trades like farming, barrel making, otherwise known as coopers. So the name cooper means, in Old World, means barrel making. So if your name is Cooper, that comes from this terminology right here. Blacksmiths and shoemakers. And my great-great-grandparents were also coopers as well. All right. And, of course, there was a lot of hatred for, as I mentioned before, for Irish. They were not well received, and so even if places were looking for jobs, they did not want Irish. And so you see here in this picture, it says help wanted, but no Irish. They didn't want Irish applying for the job. All right, Mexicanos shared knowledge of raising cattle, making tortillas and adobe homes, often not protected by the U.S. government. And they lived primarily in the area that we received, or that we acquired rather, as a result of the war with Mexico in 1848. So that's Texas, that's New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, and California. And again, a lot of discrimination with them as well. And if they lived in the areas of land that were taken over as a result of the war with Mexico, they continued to stay there and eventually became citizens of the United States. So Chinese and Mexican discrimination. Although the Chinese and Mexicans worked hard as miners and contributed to California's development, they both faced a tremendous amount of discrimination. Eventually, the Chinese will not be allowed to come to the United States following the passage of something called the Chinese Exclusion Act, which I believe was in 1882. But for about 40 or 50 years, Chinese are not allowed to come to the United States. And of course, Mexicans face a tremendous amount of discrimination, just like we saw earlier with the Irish, also facing discrimination, even though they helped build the Transcontinental Railroad, continued to be persecuted while they were here. So previously we talked about economic and political discrimination, and touched a little bit on religious discrimination with Catholics and the Irish, but there was also religious discrimination among the Mormons, who were forced to move many times because of their religious beliefs. They finally settled in the territory of Utah and created a successful community there. And Oregon pioneers, another group of people helped to diversify the West, traveled more than 2,000 miles, overcame many hardships, dangerous rivers, diseases, and Native American attacks, to travel westward up into what will eventually become the state of Oregon. And other things that brought a lot of people out west was the California Gold Rush, 1849, which used a variety of techniques for finding gold in California, such as placer mining. All right, on this page, you'll simply pause the video and see if you can answer these two questions below. All right, everybody, so welcome back. The question says, which area identifies where the Oregon Trail ended? And if you put area 5, you were correct. And area 6 for the next one, which area on the map identifies the territory where gold was discovered in 1849? And finally, this picture here of Lakota Sioux Native Americans. These are young men in both pictures. And it's the same young men in both pictures. So on the left-hand side, you see the Lakota Sioux in South Dakota that are still in their tribal clothing. And 3 years later, you see these same Lakota Sioux young gentlemen in this photo after they have spent 3 years in the Carlisle Indian Industrial Boarding School in Pennsylvania, where they were sent to learn English, to take on Christian names, and really kind of get rid of their Native American names that they were born with, and begin dressing more like, I guess back then they would have said, civilized people. And so the goal of these boarding schools was to make them look less Native American and more like white Americans or European Americans. So take time to study these pictures and answer the questions that are located on your note page. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me or come to a Zoom meeting.